Welcome to Pride Partners International's monthly webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Pride Partners International is a global partnership of firms and specialists in transfer pricing and financial valuation. The association is the meeting ground for professionals capable of facing a challenging business environment, helping them connect to boost their continuous professional development and enhance their technical and human skills and abilities. This partnership is made up of experts recognized by their trajectory and prestige in the transfer pricing and financial valuation fields. Experts that constantly participate in the exchange of technical information, knowledge development, and implementation of global best practices. When a firm joins the PPI partnership, it increases its scope immediately and exponentially. Business becomes much simpler by accessing training, technology, resource optimization, and new business opportunities, among other benefits. We invite you to learn more about Pride Partners International. Contact our agents and be part of the global elite of transfer pricing and financial valuation consulting. Our transmission will begin shortly. We invite you to participate actively by sending all your questions or comments through the live chat. Again, thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoy the event.
So hello everyone, and many thanks for attending this webinar, and many thanks to PPI for the invitation and for the flawless organization. My name is Thibaut Roch. I am one of TP Qube co-founder, and it will be my pleasure to guide you through this presentation on the topic of enhancing transfer pricing comparable company searches thanks to artificial intelligence. Okay, so maybe very quickly, first a couple of words about us at TP Qube. We're economists, and we created TP Qube in order to develop innovative tools for transfer pricing analysis. So obviously, this is a topic that we really like to talk about. And our objectives today will be to present some example of our tools, leveraging AI techniques, but also maybe to demystify a bit the topic. So to do this, we will go through a case study, and we will talk about 4 tools that we use in these types of case studies. First, a tool to extract company description. Second, a tool to cluster potentially comparable companies. Third, a tool to continue filling automatically the rejection matrix, quite interesting tool. And fourth one, another approach actually to directly estimate automatically an arm's length range for the transactional net margin method. Okay, so maybe first what we wanted to do is to share with you 3 thoughts on AI to make sure that we are all on the same page. First, people talk a lot about AI, and we might want to limit the subject to a marketing concept. So it is not. There is a reality behind artificial intelligence. And today we are able to do things that seemed impossible 20 years ago. So if you simply use Google Translation, you have automatic translation, instant automatic translation with very, very few errors. This is something that was unheard of 20 years ago. And also, without doing too much semantic, just to clarify, we at TP Qube talk a lot about artificial intelligence, but more specifically, actually, we use statistical learning models, also called machine learning models, which is a very large family of models. And within this family, we use models that are developed for natural language processing, so NLP. Second thoughts, and as most of you may know, AI is a really old topic. Actually, Turing talked about it in the 40s and the 50s. And there is a renewed interest for AI since the 80s, and really an explosion that started maybe 10 to 20 years ago. And we had this explosion mostly because we now have access to larger data sets, but also because we have more computing power and because we have better models. And in particular, people talk a lot in the last 10 years about deep learning, which are multi-layered neural networks. And third thoughts that we wanted to share with you is that, people maybe talk about artificial intelligence generally, But in practice, actually, what we use is that we use specific algorithms that are designed for specific problems. So you may not want to be able actually to use one algorithm that was developed on one problem. You may not be able to use it on a different issue. And to give you a very concrete example of what we mean by algorithm, it's an example of a very early example, actually, of a character recognition model developed by Yann Lequin at the Bell Labs in the 1980s. And what you see on the left-hand side is an image that is actually the rendering of the software that was developed by Lequin. And on the top left, what you see is the number 4 that was handwritten. And what the model does is that it's a character recognition model. It will tell you, okay, this is a number 4. And what's interesting in this model is that it was used in real life. It was used actually for bank checks character recognition. So here on the right-hand side, what you have is a bank check with 100 pound amount, I think. And in this instance, what the model will tell you is that it will recognize that is a bank check for 100 pounds. Again, this was a model developed for using neural networks, but this model was developed for this specific issue. You may not be able to apply exactly this problem to another issue, and you may want to use maybe a different model. You may want to use a different data set. You may want to even use actually a different performance metric. So now let's jump into the case study. So it's a typical transfer pricing assignment that we have here. So we want to perform a comparable company search for the wholesale distribution of frozen products in Europe. So you may have, let's say, a food processing company, and this food processing company may have distribution subsidiaries. So sending actually the frozen food to these distribution companies, and these distribution companies reselling the frozen food to, let's say, supermarkets. So really a typical transfer pricing assignment. We are using here the transactional net margin method. And we want to find good benchmarks, so good comparable companies performing wholesale distribution of frozen products. And to do so, we all use the same process, more or less. So we all start from a search strategy on a data provider. So maybe in this case, Bureau van Dijk, Orbis, or Amadeus. So we did the exercise, and we end up on Orbis with 600 companies in the NAS code 4639, that is for non-specialized wholesale, where you will find actually wholesalers of frozen products. So that's the first step. Second step, you want an analyst to select comparable companies. So the analyst will manually review the 600 companies and decide among them which are the best comparable companies, and you end up with a set of 5 to 75 companies. Third step, usually you have a manager that will review the work of the analyst. So we have the quality control. Fourth step, completion of the ratios, and last step, obviously, the redaction of the report. And the problems with this process are numerous. Actually, you have 3 main problems. The first one is that, and we all know this is a really time-consuming process, especially the selection of comparable companies by the analyst. It takes a lot of time. But also, since it is done by humans, well, you have mistakes. Nobody is perfect, so this is a really error-prone process. And finally, you may end up with a poor audit trail. So you may not actually take screenshots for all your rejected companies, and you may not be able to correctly defend your comparable company search in 2 to 3 years, where maybe the website of a given comparable company will have changed, or maybe you just don't remember exactly why you decided to select this company and not this one. So how can AI help you in this context? So what we did is that we thought about it, and we we started from this process, and we really wanted to alleviate the pain points of the process. So what we did is that we developed specific tools for the selection of comparable companies and for the quality control. So I'm going to dig a bit deeper on that later in the presentation, but just keep in mind one thing here is that we have a sort of toolbox, but this toolbox can only help an analyst. It cannot fully replace an analyst. So we still need at some point some human intervention in the process. Okay, and in general, how do our models work? So this is really only the general characteristics of all these models. So we use the same types of input data in the sense that we always rely on company websites and maybe some additional public information such as Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, things like that. But we really want to start from information given by the company itself because this is the most reliable information. And what we do is that we have basically robots that will go through all the different company websites that will extract this information. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to render this information in a really convenient format, meaning that we're simply going to render this information on an Excel file. So if you have, let's say that you did your search strategy on the Orbis database, you have an Excel from Orbis with a list of companies, one line being one company. What we simply do is that we add additional columns to this Excel. Okay, and we also have a lot of information about the different websites, and typically what we give back is that we give back all the screenshots. That's what we save for a given search. So the process, I'm not going to dig deeper into this, but just keep in mind that it's a very straightforward process. We simply exchange Excel files. So that's the most important thing to remember here. Okay, so the typical rendering of our tool, it's an Excel file. Here on the left-hand side, you have actually the list of companies provided by the data provider. Then the website actually that we, here it's a field that we filled ourselves. And then a bunch of additional fields such as best sentence, keywords, etc. I'm going to dig deeper into that in a second, but just to give you an idea of the rendering of our tools. Okay, so now really the fun part, really digging deeper into the details. So first thing that our tools can do is to perform, is to extract company descriptions. So that's really the most obvious thing to do, right? So we have all these company websites, we extract a lot of information, we go through the entire company websites usually, and then from this really rich information that we usually translate, well, we are able to extract one sentence or a couple of sentences that best describe the company. And these sentences are usually really good and really interesting because they are sentences that are written by the company itself. So here in this case, we have a company that says that is specialized in the distribution of frozen food products, mainly focused on bakeries, pastry shops, and ice cream parlors. Okay, so in this case, maybe it could be a really, really good comparable company. In our case, where we are searching for a wholesaler of frozen products. So really good description. And what's great here is that we have a perfect audit trail because we have saved actually the website. So we know exactly where this sentence comes from. We can be sure that it's 100% reliable. So second use of our tools that may be well, a bit less intuitive, so maybe a bit harder to grasp, but basically at the start of the search, as I mentioned, you have this Excel file, and inside this Excel file, you have one column that is for clusters. So what our tool does, is to cluster companies, so basically to group potentially comparable companies into homogeneous groups. And in this case, what our tools, in this real case, actually, what our tools did is that it actually selected some companies and it said, okay, so you see these companies on the left-hand side. So Frost, Anedico, Argogel. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. So these companies, well, they look alike, and we can consider that they should be part of the same cluster. Here, a cluster that actually is labeled automatically frozen, because what our model does is that it understands that there are similarities between these websites, and that these similarities end up with it being an homogeneous group of companies that, well, in this case, have something to do about frozen products. And on the right-hand side, what you see is that our tool also selected another cluster here for wine companies. So actually companies that are distributing wine. And again, same process, the tool, well, it identified that the company were broadly similar and decided to group them into one cluster. And this feature is actually extremely interesting to save time, because when the analyst will start his job, he can simply select the cluster that seems best to him and start with this cluster. And then it's really easy to identify the so-called gold standard. So the best comparable companies that you may have in your sample. So obviously here in this case, the analyst would select the frozen cluster, would go through the companies in this frozen cluster and identify the best ones. And here in this case, actually, we have close to 9% of the data set that were actually companies that had to do with frozen products. And here, what we have in this table is all the associated keywords. So basically, these are the most relevant keywords to identify this specific cluster. So obviously the first one is frozen, that's the main one, we already identified it, but it's also fish, meat, distribution, cream, etc. So all that means that we have companies distributing food products that are frozen food products. Okay, we think that this is maybe a really good cluster. So this is where we want to start our search. We will gain a lot of time by starting with this cluster. And next feature is to continue filling automatically rejection matrix. Okay, so this one is really interesting. So what we do is that, let's say that you reviewed, I don't know, 50 companies, and out of these 50 companies, you selected 5 of them. So here in this example, we said, okay, companies B and E, they are really good. I think that they are good comparable companies, and that's it. What the tool does is that for the remaining companies, so in our case, for the 550 companies remaining, the tool will tell you, okay, I identified the ones that I think are the best comparable companies. So here the companies H, K, and L, the tool already tells you, okay, I think that these are the best companies. It does not mean actually that the tool is 100% right. Maybe one of them actually will not be independent. Maybe upon further inspection, you will say, oh, okay, no, the products are a bit different. The tool might not be perfect, but it will give you actually very quickly a list of potentially good comparable companies. And what you can also do is that is really interesting, is at the end of the search, you can use this tool to perform a quality check. So let's say that you have your full actually comparable company search performed. You identify 25 companies. What the tool will tell you is that, okay, so you identified 25 companies. You have a bit more than 575 companies that you rejected. Out of these 575 companies that you rejected, I think that, well, this precise company may actually be also good comparable companies. And finally, what we wanted to present to you today is another approach. So a really completely different feature, which is an approach to determine the automatically an arm's length range for the transactional net margin method. So the way the model works and the philosophy is really completely different. Here, we do not want to have a set of comparable companies. We directly want to have an arm's length range. So what we did is that we built predictive statistical learning models. And these models, we have trained them on dozens of thousands of independent companies. So we used for that data from the Bureau van Dijk. And so the model is trained so that now what we only have to do is that we have to use tested party data. So a couple of characteristics about the tested parties. So typically it's activity, it's location, a couple of financial metrics, including working capital ratios, its maturity, etc., etc. Then we feed this characteristic into the model, and the model directly gives you an estimation of the arm's length range. So we applied this to a case for wholesale activities of medical equipment for a French company. And what you see here on the left-hand side are the results for this specific search. And what the model tells you is that in this case, for the wholesale of medical equipment, we believe that the interquartile range should be between minus 0.6% at the first quartile and 3.5% at the third quartile, with a median of 2.5%. And what's also interesting with this model is that it gives you the influence of the key factors to explain a bit this profitability, and more precisely to explain the profitability of the median point here of 2.5%. And what we're saying is that the average observation in this sector, so the average wholesaler of medical equipment has a profitability actually of 1.2%. But our case is a bit different, and we have two major impacts. We have one impact of working capital ratios, and we have one impact of maturity, which is actually quite sizable, 0.9%. And we end up with this predicted profitability that is a lot higher actually for our precise target company, and which is due in this case mainly to the fact that our company has a different maturity. So maybe to sum things up, some concluding remarks. And the main one is that transfer pricing is a domain where artificial intelligence really can make a difference. There is a need in transfer pricing for standardized, rigorous, reproducible analysis. And this is exactly what AI can provide you. So among many benefits, AI will bring you quicker searches. So that's obvious from what we saw. Actually, when you use AI tools, you are able actually to alleviate some of the manual work and replace it with work done by the machine. So it's a lot faster. Second, you have less human error. That's also obvious. You have this possibility for quality checks, for example, that are actually extremely helpful when you perform a comparable company search. Third, you will use more reliable information. We use only information for company websites, and we are able actually to dig really deep into details. We are able actually to look at all the company web pages, and this is actually a great advantage compared to a human that simply has not enough time actually to go through everything and all, you know, and clicking on every single page on every single website. So humans can't do that. The machine can do it. So that's why we have more reliable information. And finally, you have simply the best-in-class audit trail, because we have all the websites that are stored, and you have all the relevant pages that are highlighted. So you cannot do a better audit trail than that. So thank you so much for listening, and I think that we're going to take questions right now. Thank you.